The galaxy was already dead, but the people living in it did not know it yet. The silence was the loudest thing in the Isstvan system. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath before a kill. 3 hours ago, the communication towers on the planet's surface had stopped working. The astropaths who sent messages through dreams were screaming in their sleep. They saw fire and blood. High above the planet, Isstvan III, a massive fleet of warships floated in the dark void. They looked like metal cities drifting in space. The largest ship was the Vengeful Spirit. It was a mountain of steel and guns. It belonged to the Warmaster Horus. He was the favorite son of the Emperor. He was supposed to be the protector of humanity. But inside the ventilation shafts of his flagship, a shadow moved. The shadow was a man. He was not a space marine. He was not a genetically modified giant. He was a human who had pushed his body and mind to the absolute limit. He wore armor made of black plates that absorbed the light. A long cape made of memory fabric hung from his shoulders. It looked like the wings of a bat. He was the detective. He had come to this ship because the numbers did not add up. For 6 months, he had studied the supply logs of the Great Crusade. He saw patterns that no one else saw. He saw millions of bolter shells vanish from the inventory. He saw virus bombs moved from secure vaults without proper authorization codes. The Imperial bureaucracy was slow and stupid. It usually lost things by accident. But this was precise. This was careful. Someone was hiding a massive army's worth of weapons. The detective had snuck onto a supply shuttle to find the truth. Now he crouched on a metal beam high above the Strategium deck. He looked down through the grate. He saw the Warmaster. Horus stood over a hololithic table. The map showed the planet below, but the markers on the map were wrong. The troops on the ground were loyal soldiers. They were waiting for orders. They thought they were fighting rebels. They did not know their own father was aiming guns at them. The detective tapped the side of his cowl. His audio sensors amplified the voices below. He heard Horus speak. The voice was deep and charismatic. It sounded like a friend. But the words were treason. Horus gave the order to fire. He did not hesitate. He did not sound sad. He sounded cold. The detective watched the screens on the wall. The launch bay doors opened on the bottom of the ship. Huge missiles dropped into the atmosphere. They were not normal explosives. They were life-eater virus bombs. The detective felt a sick feeling in his stomach. He had fought criminals in the dark alleys of hive cities. He had stopped murderers and thieves. But this was a crime on a scale he could barely understand. This was the murder of a world. He watched the screens as the bombs hit the surface. Green clouds erupted instantly. The virus ate everything organic. It turned people into sludge in seconds. Then the atmosphere ignited. The entire planet turned into a ball of fire. The detective recorded everything on a data slate. He had the proof. The greatest hero of the Imperium was a traitor. The Warmaster had made a pact with dark powers. The detective knew he could not stop this fleet alone. He had gadgets and training, but he was just one man against a legion of demigods. His mission now was not to fight. It was to warn terror. He had to tell the Emperor that his son had fallen. He checked his utility belt. He had smoke pellets and grappling hooks. He had a rebreather for toxic air. He moved silently back into the shadows. The ship was on high alert now. The hallways would be full of traitor marines. Survival was statistically unlikely. But the detective did not care about the odds. He only cared about the mission. He vanished into the dark vents as the galaxy began to burn around him. The metal shaft was hot and smelled like old oil. The detective crawled on his stomach. He moved one limb at a time. His armor made no sound against the steel. He was deep inside the Vengeful Spirit now. The ship was not just a vehicle. It was a flying city made of iron and hate. The walls vibrated. The massive engines far below were pushing the ship into a new orbit. The detective checked his wrist computer. The map of the ship was glowing in green lines. The map was old. He had stolen it from a shipyard archive on Terra years ago. He hoped the layout had not changed. He needed to get to the astropathic choir. That was the room where the psychic wizards lived. They were the only way to send a message faster than light. He had to tell the Emperor about the bombs. He had to tell Terra that Horus was killing his own brothers. He reached a grate and looked down. Below him was a long hallway. It was wide enough for a tank to drive through. The floor was black metal. The walls were covered in banners. The banners used to show the wolf head of the lunar wolves. Now they were painted over. They showed the eye of Horus. The paint was still wet. It dripped like blood. A squad of soldiers marched past. They were not space marines. They were human crew members. They wore grey uniforms. They carried laser guns. Their faces looked pale. They were sweating. They did not look like proud soldiers of the Imperium. They looked like men who were afraid of their own commander. The detective listened to their footsteps. They were out of step. They were nervous. This was good. Nervous men made mistakes. Nervous men did not check the shadows on the ceiling. The detective waited for them to pass. He unlatched the grate. He dropped silently to the floor. His cape snapped open for a second to slow his fall. He landed in a crouch. He stood up and pressed his back against the wall. He was a shadow in a hallway of dim red lights. He needed supplies. He had his belt of gadgets, but he needed food and water. This siege would last a long time. He moved down the hall. He kept his knees bent to absorb the sound of his boots. He heard a noise around the corner. It was a heavy, mechanical stomping sound. He froze. He knew that sound. It was a servitor, a cyborg slave. The servitor rounded the corner. It was a man combined with a forklift. Its left arm was a hydraulic clamp. Its eyes were gone. They were replaced by red lenses. The servitor was carrying a crate of ammunition. It did not have a brain to think with. It only followed simple programming. But it had sensors. If it saw him, it would sound an alarm. The detective did not run. He did not hide. He reached into his belt and pulled out a small black disc. He threw it. The disc slid across the floor and stopped behind the servitor. The disc made a sharp clicking sound. The servitor stopped. Its head turned toward the noise. The detective moved. He crossed the gap in 2 seconds. He jumped onto the back of the cyborg. He found the panel on its neck. He ripped the wires out. The servitor shut down instantly. It slumped forward. The crate of ammo fell with a heavy thud. The detective dragged the heavy metal body into a side room. It was a maintenance closet. He closed the door. He checked the crate. It was full of bolter shells. They were huge explosive bullets. They were useless to him. He did not use guns. Guns were loud. Guns ran out of bullets. He used his hands and his mind. He left the crate. He searched the room. He found a technician's lunchbox. Inside was a protein bar and a flask of water. He took them. He lifted his mask slightly and took a bite. The food tasted like chalk. It was dry and tasteless, but it was fuel. He needed calories. His body was a machine too. It needed energy to fight. He drank half the water and put the flask on his belt. He left the closet. He checked his map again. The astropathic choir was 10 decks up. He had to climb. He found the service ladder. It went up through a narrow tube. He climbed for an hour. His muscles burned. The air got colder as he went higher. The gravity plating was weaker here. He felt lighter. He reached a landing on the crew deck. This deck was different. It was cleaner. The walls were white marble. Statues of heroes lined the walls. This was where the officers lived. It was quiet here. Too quiet. He saw a terminal on the wall. It was a cogitator, a computer used by the Mechanicum. He approached it. He needed to know what the ship was doing. He pulled a cable from his gauntlet. He plugged it into the data port. The screen flickered green. Text scrolled fast. The detective read it faster. He had trained his eyes to read at high speed. The logs were chaotic. They showed orders going out to the rest of the fleet. The World Eaters and the Death Guard were also purging their ranks. It was not just Horus. It was half the legions. The scope of the betrayal was massive. The detective felt a cold weight in his chest. This was not a mutiny. This was a civil war. Then he saw a file that made him pause. It was a security report. It said that a shuttle had launched from the flight deck 1 hour ago. The shuttle was carrying a civilian named Euphrates Keeler, the Remembrancer. The detective knew that name. She was a journalist. She had been asking questions too. The report said she was marked for execution, but she had escaped. The detective felt a small spark of hope. If she got away, she could warn someone. But he could not rely on that. He had to finish his mission. He disconnected from the computer. He heard a door open down the hall. Voices drifted toward him. These voices were not human. They were deep and booming. They sounded like grinding stones, space marines, 2 of them. The detective looked for a hiding spot. There was nowhere to go. The hall was long and straight. The statues offered some cover, but not enough. He looked up. The ceiling had decorative arches. He fired his grapple gun. The hook caught the stone arch. The wire pulled him up. He crouched on top of the archway. He was 20 feet in the air. He wrapped his cape around him. He became part of the stone. The Space Marines walked underneath him. They were green giants. They wore the sea-green armor of the sons of Horus. They did not wear helmets. Their faces were broad and scarred. They were laughing. "The virus burns well," one of them said. His voice was like a low growl. "It cleans the weakness from the Legion," the other said. "The Warmaster is right. The Emperor is soft. He left us to do the hard work." The detective watched them. He analyzed them. He looked for gaps in their armor. He looked at how they moved. They were fast, faster than any human should be. Their armor weighed hundreds of pounds, but they walked quietly. They were apex predators. If he dropped down now, he would die. His punches would break against their ceramide plates. His gadgets might annoy them but would not kill them. He had to be smarter. He had to be the ghost they feared. He waited until they turned the corner. He dropped down. He landed silently. He followed them. He needed to know where they were going. They might lead him to a high-priority target. They walked to a large double door. The door was guarded by 2 more Marines. These guards had heavy bolters. They stood like statues. The 2 walking Marines saluted and went inside. The detective crept closer. He stayed in the blind spot of the security cameras. He used a small mirror on a stick to look around the corner. The door was the entrance to the strategic planning room for this deck. He needed to get in there. He needed to hear what they were planning. But 4 Space Marines were too many. He needed a distraction. He looked at the wall panels. He saw a conduit for the electrical system. He took out a small device. It was an explosive gel sprayer. He sprayed a line of gel over the conduit. He put a small detonator in the gel. He moved back. He went down the hall 50 feet. He hid behind a statue of a saint. He pressed the button on his belt. The explosion was small but sharp. It blew the panel off the wall. Sparks flew everywhere. The lights in the hallway flickered and died. The emergency red lights came on. The alarm started to wail. "Security breach," one of the guards shouted. The two guards at the door moved toward the explosion. They had their guns raised. They were disciplined. They did not run blindly. They moved in a tactical formation. They checked their corners. This was the mistake the detective wanted them to make. They were looking for a soldier. They were looking for someone who fought like them. They were not looking for the detective. The detective moved while they were distracted. He did not go toward the explosion. He went to the door they had left unguarded. He hacked the keypad. It took 4 seconds. The light turned green. The door hissed open. He slipped inside and closed it before the guards turned back. The room inside was dark. A large table glowed in the center. Holograms of the planet below floated in the air. The two Marines who had entered earlier were there, but they were not alone. A man in red power armor stood at the head of the table. He had a bald head with metal studs. He held a large mace. It was the equerry. Massacre, the Twisted. The detective stopped breathing. This was a high-ranking traitor. Massacre was Horus's left hand. He was dangerous. The detective hid behind a bank of computer servers. He listened. "The purge is nearly complete," Massacre said. His voice was raspy. He had been injured long ago, and his body was broken and rebuilt. But there are pockets of resistance. Garrow took the Eisenstein. He fled. "Let him run," one of the Marines said. "He cannot outrun the fleet." "Do not underestimate loyalty," Massacre warned. "Loyalty is a disease. It makes men do irrational things." The detective recorded every word. Garrow. The name was familiar. Nathaniel Garrow, a captain of the Death Guard. If Garrow had fled, that meant there was a loyalist ship out there. The detective had a new objective. He did not need to reach the astropaths. He needed to reach the communication array and signal the Eisenstein. He needed to give Garrow the data he had collected, the proof of the virus bombs. Massacre turned to the table. "We must secure the ship. There are reports of intruders. The life support sensors show bio-signs in the vents, rats or spies. We will hunt them down," the Marine said. "No," Massacre said. "Do not waste time hunting rats. Release the Dark Ones." The detective frowned behind his mask. The Dark Ones. He did not know that term. It was not a standard military designation. Massacre pressed a rune on the table. "Open the containment cells on deck 19. Let the Neverborn feed." The detective felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The air in the room changed. The shadows seemed to get longer. He smelled sulfur and rotting meat. He knew he had to leave. He had the intel. He knew where to send the signal. He started to back away toward a maintenance hatch in the floor. He lifted the hatch slowly. It made a tiny squeak. Massacre's head snapped up. He looked directly at the server bank. "There," the Twisted One hissed. The Space Marine drew his bolt pistol faster than a human eye could follow. He fired. The shell blew the server bank apart. Metal and sparks exploded. The detective was already moving. He dove through the smoke. He rolled across the floor. A second shot hit the floor where he had been a second ago. The explosion threw him against the wall. His armor took the impact. His ribs ached. He threw a smoke pellet. Thick, grey smoke filled the room instantly. The Space Marines switched to thermal vision. They could see his body heat. The detective knew this. He threw a flare to the left. The flare burned white hot. It blinded their thermal sensors for a moment. In that moment, he jumped. He went for the ventilation duct on the wall. He kicked the grate open. He pulled himself in. "Seal the vents," Massacre screamed. The detective crawled fast. He heard the metal shutters slamming down behind him. They were sealing the ship deck by deck. He had to move faster. He slid down a chute. He fell 3 decks. He landed in a pile of soft piping. He was in the water recycling center. It was humid here. Steam filled the air. The detective stood up. He checked his gear. His cape was torn. His armor was scorched. But he was alive. He was not safe, though. Malaghurst had released something. The Neverborn. The detective checked his motion tracker. The screen showed multiple contacts moving toward him. They were not moving like soldiers. They were moving like animals. They were scurrying on the walls and ceilings. He drew his grappling gun. He reloaded his utility belt. He took a deep breath of the recycled air. "Let them come," he whispered. He started to set traps. He strung monofilament wire across the doorway. It was a wire so thin it could cut through bone. He placed proximity mines on the walls. He sprayed explosive gel on the floor. He turned the steam valves to maximum pressure. He created a kill box. The first creature appeared out of the mist. It looked like a dog, but it was inside out. Its muscles were exposed. It had no eyes, just a mouth full of needles. It was a demon, a small one, a war predator. It hissed and leaped. The detective did not flinch. He sidestepped. He swung his armored gauntlet. The heavy brass knuckles hit the creature in the throat. It crunched. The creature dissolved into black smoke. More came. They poured out of the pipes. They were small red things with claws. They laughed as they attacked. They were fast, but they were mindless. The detective fought. He was a whirlwind of black cloth and hard strikes. He used the environment. He kicked a demon into the monofilament wire. It sliced the beast in half. He detonated the mines when a group bunched up. Blue fire filled the hallway. He was winning the fight, but he was losing time. He could hear heavy boots approaching behind the demons. The Space Marines were coming to finish what the monster started. The detective needed an exit. He looked at the main water pipe. It was wide enough for a man. It led down to the reactor decks. It would be dangerous. The radiation could be lethal, but staying here was certain death. He punched the control panel for the flush cycle. The valve opened. Water rushed in. The current was strong. The detective took a breath and jumped into the pipe. The water carried him away into the dark. He tumbled through the dark water. He hit the walls of the pipe. He used his cape to protect his head. The ride lasted for 2 minutes. He was dumped out onto a metal grating. He coughed up water. The air here tasted like copper. He was in the reactor relay. The humming was deafening here. The plasma reactors were the heart of the ship. He stood up. He was shivering. The water was cold. He checked his radiation counter. It was clicking slowly. Safe for now. But he could not stay long. He looked around. This area was vast. Huge cables hung from the ceiling like vines. Shadows stretched everywhere. He was deep in the underworld of the flagship. He moved toward a service elevator. He needed to get back up to the communications array. But as he walked, he saw something on the wall. It was a symbol painted in blood. It was an 8-pointed star. He had seen this symbol in ancient books. It was the mark of chaos, the ruin of souls. He realized then that his mission was harder than he thought. He was not just fighting traitors. He was fighting a spiritual sickness. The ship itself was turning against him. The metal groaned. The lights flickered in a rhythm that sounded like a heartbeat. The detective narrowed his eyes. He was a man of logic. He believed in evidence and cause. He did not believe in magic, but he accepted the data before him. The enemy had a new weapon, a weapon of the mind. He reached the elevator. He bypassed the lock. The doors opened. He stepped in. He pressed the button for the upper decks. The elevator started to rise. Suddenly, the elevator stopped. The lights went out. The detective stood in the pitch black. He heard breathing. It was right next to his ear. "Who are you?" a voice whispered. It was a voice made of dry leaves. The detective turned on his cowl's night vision. The elevator was empty. "I am the justice you cannot escape," the detective said to the empty air. The elevator started moving again. The voice laughed. It faded away. The detective checked his heart rate monitor. It had not spiked. He was calm. Fear was a tool. He used it on others. He did not let it control him. The doors opened on the gunnery deck. This was where the massive macro cannons were loaded. Hundreds of slaves were pulling chains. They were loading shells the size of cars. The slave masters whipped them. The noise was incredible. The detective moved along the catwalks above the slaves. He saw the cruelty of the Traitor Legion. They worked the humans until they died and then threw the bodies into the furnaces. It made him angry. A cold, focused anger. He wanted to save them all, but he couldn't. Not today. He had to save the species first. He saw a communications junction box on the far wall. It was guarded by a servitor with a heavy stubber gun. The detective needed to access that box to boost his signal to the Eisenstein. He analyzed the room. The slaves were moving a massive shell on a cart. The track went right past the guard. The detective pulled out a small magnetic device. He timed his throw. The device stuck to the wheel of the shell cart. The device sent a signal to the cart's motor. The motor surged. The cart sped up. It jumped the track. The massive shell rolled off. It crashed into the guard post. The servitor was crushed. The heavy stubber fired wildly into the ceiling. Panic erupted. The slaves ran. The masters shouted. Chaos. The detective thrived in chaos. He swung down from the catwalk on his grapple line. He landed by the junction box. He plugged in his data slate. He began the upload. He was sending a coded burst. It contained the video of the virus bombing. It contained the logs of the traitor supply lines. "Come on," he muttered. The progress bar moved slowly. 50%, 60%. A bolt shell hit the wall next to his head. Metal fragments cut his cheek. He did not look up. He kept his hand on the slate. 80%. Another shot. Closer. He looked. A Space Marine officer was striding toward him across the deck. He had a power sword that crackled with blue energy. He was pushing slaves out of his way. "Get away from the console, little man," the officer roared. 90%. The Marine was 30 feet away. He broke into a run. The detective pulled a flashbang grenade from his belt. He did not throw it at the Marine. He dropped it at his own feet. 100%. Upload complete. The grenade went off. A blinding white light filled the corner. The Marine shielded his eyes. When the light faded, the detective was gone. The console was destroyed. The data slate was gone. The Marine roared in frustration. He slashed the empty air with his sword. The detective was already 3 levels down, sliding down a grease chute. He had sent the message. The Eisenstein would know. Garo would know. Now the detective just had to survive long enough for it to matter. He landed in a pile of refuse in the waste processing sector. He stood up and wiped the grease from his cape. He was deep in enemy territory. The entire ship was hunting him now. He had no way off, no allies, no reinforcements. He checked his utility belt. He had 3 smoke pellets left, 2 grapple charges, 1 nutrient bar, and his fists. He looked into the darkness of the ship's belly. "I'm just getting started," he said. He began to plan his war. He would not attack their main force. He would attack their logistics. He would break their machines. He would poison their water. He would make them fear the shadows. He would be the grit in the gears of the war machine. He moved deeper into the dark, ready for the long night ahead. He was the detective, and he had work to do. The war in the shadows lasted for 3 weeks. Time on the Vengeful Spirit was not measured in days and nights. It was measured in shift cycles and engine pulses. The detective had become a part of the ship's ecosystem. He was a parasite, living in the metal intestines of the beast. His armor was no longer sleek and black. It was scratched and covered in grease. The memory fabric cape was torn in 3 places. He had patched it with industrial tape. His supplies were critically low. The nutrient bars were gone. He had been stealing ration packs from dead crew members. The food was a grey paste made of recycled starch and protein. It tasted like despair. His body was starting to consume itself. His muscle mass was decreasing. His reaction times were slowing down by milliseconds. He measured this deterioration every morning. He was dying slowly, but he was making them pay for every hour he stayed alive. He had destroyed 4 ammunition elevators. He had corrupted the targeting logic of the starboard macro cannon batteries. He had vented 3 compartments of sleeping quarters into the void. He did not kill for pleasure. He killed to reduce the efficiency of the Legion. He was a variable they could not calculate. The lower decks were now full of rumors. The human serfs whispered about the Bat Demon. They said it drank blood. They said it could walk through walls. The Space Marines did not believe in ghosts, but they were frustrated. Patrols were doubled. Sentries were placed at every junction. The detective had forced a legion of super soldiers to look over their shoulders. He sat in a crawl space above the primary plasma conduits. It was hot here. The heat was a constant physical weight. He was analyzing a stolen data slate. The ship was preparing for something big. The engine vibrations had changed frequency. The Geller field generators were charging. They were preparing to enter the warp. The detective knew what the warp was in theory. It was a dimension of energy. It was dangerous for travel. But he had seen the demons. He knew it was not just energy. It was a place of intelligence, a place of malice. If the ship entered the warp while he was still on board, his mission would become infinitely harder. The laws of physics would bend. His logic might not apply. He needed to stop the jump or delay it. He looked at the schematics of the Geller field generators. They were heavily guarded. A direct assault was impossible. He needed a diversion, a massive one. He looked at the fuel lines running to the portside maneuver thrusters. If he ruptured those lines, the ship would list. The captains would have to abort the jump to stabilize the vessel. It was a dangerous plan. It would expose his position. But he had no choice. He moved through the crawl space. His knees were bruised and bleeding inside his suit. The padding had worn away days ago. He ignored the pain. Pain was just information sent to the brain. He could choose to ignore it. He reached the fuel access valve. It was a manual wheel the size of a shield. It was rusted shut. He applied leverage. His servos whined. The wheel turned with a screech of metal on metal. Liquid promethium hissed into the overflow pipe. He set a timer on a small explosive charge. He placed it on the pipe. He gave himself 3 minutes to clear the blast zone. He dropped down a maintenance ladder. He ran. He kept his body low. He heard the explosion behind him. It was a dull thump that shook the floor. Then the alarm started. They were different this time. They were not the intrusion alarms. They were the hull breach alarms. The ship tilted. The artificial gravity struggled to compensate. The detective stumbled. He caught himself on a railing. He heard shouting. He checked his wrist computer. The Geller field charge cycle was aborting. He had done it. He had bought himself more time in real space. But he had also walked into a trap. The lights in the corridor turned off. All of them. Even the emergency red lights. It was total darkness. The detective switched to his thermal vision. The corridor was empty. Then the blast doors at both ends of the hall slammed shut. He was locked in a section of hallway 50 meters long. He tried the control panel on the door. It was dead. His hacking tool showed no signal. The system had been hard cut. A voice came over the Voxcaster speakers in the ceiling. It was a mechanical voice. It sounded like grinding gears. "The variable has been isolated," the voice said. "Logical prediction confirmed. You seek to delay the transition. You are predictable." The detective recognized the cadence. It was the Mechanicum, the tech priests, but this voice was wrong. It had a glitch in it, a madness. "Who are you?" the detective asked. His voice was amplified by his cowl. It sounded deep and artificial. "I am Magosilos," the voice rasped. "I serve the Warmaster. I serve the truth. You are a biological error. I will correct you." The floor vents opened. The detective expected gas. He held his breath. He checked his reed breather, but it was not gas. It was noise. A high-pitched sonic shriek filled the hallway. It was a scrap code scream. It attacked the nervous system. The detective fell to his knees. His vision blurred. The sound was trying to rewrite his brain. He activated the noise-cancelling dampeners in his cowl. The sound muffled, but the pressure remained. His head felt like it was in a vice. Then the walls began to change. The metal plates shifted. Panels opened. From the walls came the hunter-killers. They were not human. They were not space marines. They were cyber-mastiffs. Mechanical hounds the size of ponies. Their jaws were hydraulic clamps. Their paws had maglocks to run on walls. There were 3 of them. They did not bark. They just clicked. The detective stood up. He drew his grapple gun in his left hand. He held 3 flash pellets in his right. He was trapped in a box with 3 metal wolves. The Magos was watching. This was a test. The first hound lunged. It was fast. Faster than a biological dog. The detective fired the grapple at the ceiling. He pulled himself up. The hound snapped at his boots. Its metal teeth sparked against the floor. The detective swung from the ceiling. He dropped a flash pellet. It exploded in a burst of magnesium. The hound's optical sensors were overloaded. It crashed into the wall. But the other 2 adapted. They did not look at the light. They tracked his heat. One jumped from the wall. It caught the detective's cape. It pulled him down. He hit the floor hard. The hound was on top of him. Its jaws clamped onto his shoulder pauldron. The ceramite armor cracked. The pressure was immense. The detective felt his collarbone snap. He did not scream. He jammed a taser spike into the hound's eye lens. He discharged the battery. 5,000 volts went into the machine's brain. The hound convulsed and went limp. The detective kicked it off. He rolled to the side. The 3rd hound was charging. He was on his knees. He had one arm that barely worked. He threw a bowler mine. It was 2 weighted balls connected by a wire. The wire wrapped around the hound's front legs. The magnets locked. The hound tripped. It slid across the floor. The mine detonated. It blew the front legs of the machine. The detective stood up. He was breathing heavy. His shoulder was burning. He held his arm against his chest. "Impressive," the voice of Magosilos said. "Biometrics indicate significant damage, yet combat efficiency remains at 72%. You are an interesting specimen. I will harvest your gene seed." The blast door at the far end opened, but it was not a way out. It was an entrance. A figure stepped through. It was a Thalax, a shock trooper of the Mechanicum. It was a cyborg, twice the size of a man. It floated on jet thrusters. It held a lightning gun. Its face was a smooth glass mask. Inside the mask, a human skull was visible. The detective looked at his belt. He had no EMP grenades left. He had used his last big charge on the fuel line. He was hurt. He was outgunned. The Thalax raised its weapon. The lightning gun crackled. The detective did the only thing he could do. He ran at it. He did not run in a straight line. He zigzagged. The lightning bolt hit the floor where he had been. It melted the metal. The detective slid under the cyborg's guard. He fired his grapple hook, not at the ceiling, at the cyborg's face. The hook shattered the glass mask. It lodged in the skull inside. The cyborg thrashed. It fired wildly. A bolt of lightning hit the ceiling. It ruptured a steam pipe. The corridor filled with blinding white fog. The detective released the grapple line. He disappeared into the steam. The Thalax scanned for him. It could not see him. The steam blocked the thermal sensors. The detective was a ghost again. He attacked from behind. He jumped on the cyborg's back. He used his good arm to jam a pry bar into the jetpack intake. The turbine shattered. The engine exploded. The cyborg fell forward. The detective rolled away before the chassis caught fire. He lay on the floor for a moment. The pain in his shoulder was blinding. He injected a painkiller from his suit's medical port. It was his last dose. The pain faded to a dull throb. He stood up. He walked to the open door. He limped. "You cannot hide," Zalos said over the speakers. "The ship is vast, but I am the ship. I see all." The detective looked at the camera lens in the corner of the ceiling. He threw a bat-shaped shuriken. It shattered the lens. "You can't see this," the detective whispered. He found a service elevator and went down. He needed to go deeper. The upper decks were too dangerous now. He needed to find the underverse, the place where the waste went, the place where the mutants lived. He needed to disappear completely to heal. He reached the lowest deck. The air here smelled of sulfur and old blood. The walls were covered in rust. The lighting was flickering candlelight. This was where the cultists gathered, the crew members who worshipped the Chaos Gods. The detective found a hidden alcove behind a waste compactor. He sat down. He took off his helmet. His face was pale. His eyes were dark circles. He looked at his reflection in the black visor. He looked like a corpse. He tried to fix his shoulder. He reset the bone with a sickening crack. He gritted his teeth. He used the suit's internal splint system to lock it in place. He would not be able to lift his right arm above his head. His fighting ability was cut in half. He ate the last of the stolen starch paste. He drank water from a rusty pipe. He closed his eyes for 10 minutes. That was his sleep. When he opened his eyes, the ship shuddered. A sound like a billion screaming souls echoed through the hull. The walls began to bleed, literally bleed. Red, viscous fluid ran down the rust. The shadows detached themselves from the floor and started to dance. The detective checked his sensors. Radiation was spiking. Gravity was fluctuating. The laws of logic were breaking down. They had entered the warp. His sabotage had failed, or it had only delayed them. The Vengeful Spirit was now diving into the hell dimension. The detective put his helmet back on. The HUD flickered. Static ghosts danced on his screen. "Warning," the suit computer said. "Logic error. Physics violation detected. Reality instability." "Mute," the detective said. He did not need a computer to tell him he was in hell. He needed a new plan. He could not fight the ship. He could not fight the Legion. He had to fight the source. He had to find the thing that was corrupting them. He had heard Malagor speak of the Temple of the Serpent Lodge. It was a warrior lodge that had become a shrine to the dark gods. It was somewhere on the ship. If he could find it, maybe he could learn their weakness. He moved out into the corridor. The ship had changed. The distance between doors was wrong. He walked for 10 minutes and ended up in the same place he started. The hallway was a loop. The warp was playing games with him. He stopped. He closed his eyes. He stopped relying on his eyes. He relied on his other senses. He felt the air currents. He smelled the ozone of the recycling fans. The ship still had a mechanical skeleton. The warp could twist the skin, but the bones were still metal. He followed the draft of air. Logic was his anchor. If he let go of logic, he would go mad. He found a way out of the loop. He entered a large cargo bay. It was full of statues, but they were not Imperial statues. They were statues of monsters, and they were moving slowly. When he looked at them, they were still. When he looked away, he heard stone scraping on stone. He kept his eyes forward. He walked through the valley of monsters. He refused to be afraid. Fear was worship in this place. If he feared them, he gave them power. He focused on his mission. He saw a group of crewmen ahead. They were sitting in a circle. They were chanting. They had carved symbols into their skin. In the center of the circle was a prisoner. It was a woman. She wore the robes of an astropath. The detective stopped. This was bait. He knew it was bait, but he could not walk away. The astropath was a potential asset. She could send messages. He analyzed the room. 7 cultists, 1 prisoner. The cultists had makeshift weapons, knives, wrenches, chains. They were dangerous because they were crazy. They felt no pain. The detective selected a smoke pellet. He threw it into the center of the circle. Smoke filled the area. The chanting stopped. The detective moved. He did not use stealth this time. He used brutality. He broke the arm of the first cultist. He kicked the second one in the knee, shattering the joint. He moved like a blur of violence. The cultists screamed. They attacked him blindly in the smoke. One of them managed to slash his leg with a rusted knife. The armor held, but the impact bruised the muscle. The detective grabbed the astropath. She was blind. Her eyes were sewn shut. She was shaking. "I have you," he said. "Quiet." "They are coming," she whispered. "The Neverborn. They smell your soul. Your soul is so bright. It hurts them. It is so cold and hard." He dragged her away. They ran into a side corridor. He welded the door shut behind them with his laser cutter. He looked at the astropath. She was thin and frail. "Can you send a message?" he asked. "The warp scream is too loud," she said. "I cannot hear the Emperor's light. We are lost in the storm." "Keep trying," he said. "I need you to listen. Listen for the Eisenstein. Listen for any loyal voice." "Who are you?" she asked. She reached out with a trembling hand. She touched his mask. "You feel like stone, like a gargoyle on a cathedral." "I am the cure," he said. He checked his map. They were near the apothecarium, the medical bay. He needed supplies. He needed stronger painkillers. He needed stimulants. If he was going to fight demons, he needed to be faster. "We move," he said. They moved through the twisted hallways. The walls whispered his name. "Detective, detective, why do you fight? Join us. It is so easy to let go." He ignored the voices. He focused on the sound of his boots. Step, step, step. They reached the medical bay. The door was open. Inside it was a slaughterhouse. The apothecaries, the Space Marine medics, had been working here, but they were not healing. They were experimenting. Glass tanks lined the walls. Inside the tanks were floating organs. Hearts, lungs, brains. They were pulsing. They were mutated. The detective saw a supply cabinet. He smashed the glass. He grabbed vials of stims and sinskin for his wounds. He loaded his belt. Then he saw something on the operating table. It was a Space Marine. He was strapped down. His chest was open. But he was not dead. He was wide alive. His eyes were wide with horror. It was a loyalist, a lunar wolf who had refused to turn. The detective approached the table. The Marine looked at him. "Kill me," the Marine rasped. "Please, brother, kill me." The Marine's body was being changed. Extra organs were being grafted onto him. His blood was turning black. The detective looked at the monitoring equipment. The Marine was being used as an incubator for something. "I cannot save you," the detective said softly. The words tasted like ash. "Do not save me," the Marine said. "End me, before I become one of them." The detective looked at the Marine's bolt pistol onto the tray nearby. He picked it up. It was huge in his hand, heavy. He checked the magazine. One shell. He looked at the astropath. "Turn around," he said. She turned. The detective looked at the Marine. He saw the pain. He saw the honor that was still there. "Rest now," the detective said. He fired. The shot was deafening in the small room. The Marine went still. His suffering ended. The detective put the gun down. He felt a crack in his own armor. Not the physical armor, the mental armor. He had just killed a man who was asking for mercy. This place was eroding his code. It was forcing him to make impossible choices. "We have to go," he said to the astropath. "Wait," she said. Her head snapped up. "I hear something. A voice. Not from the outside, from the inside." "Who?" "It is Loken," she said. "Garviel Loken. He is alive. He is on the surface of Isstvan III. He survived the fire." The detective froze. Loken, the captain of the 10th Company, a hero. If he was alive, there was still a resistance on the ground. Is he alone? No, there are others. They are fighting in the ruins. The detective looked at the data slate on his wrist. He had a new objective. He could not just sabotage the ship. He had to find a way to help the survivors on the ground. But he was in orbit, trapped in the warp, on a hostile battleship. The logic seemed impossible. The variables were all negative. But the detective did not accept the impossible. "Can you speak to him?" he asked. "I can try to project a dream," she said. "But the cost, it will drain me." "Tell him to hold the line," the detective said. "Tell him help is coming. Tell him the bat is watching." The astropath nodded. She sat on the floor. She began to meditate. Blood ran from her nose. The effort was killing her. The detective stood guard. He reloaded his grapple gun. He sharpened his battering rams. The door to the medical bay hissed. Someone was coming. The detective stepped into the shadows. A squad of traitor Marines entered. They were looking for the noise of the gunshot. "Someone is here," the leader said. He had a helmet with a topknot. "Find them. Flay them," another said. The detective watched from the top of the supply shelves. He was outnumbered 5-1. He was injured. He was tired. Perfect. He dropped a smoke pellet. He dropped down into the grey cloud. He did not aim for the kill. He aimed for the confusion. He attached a proximity mine to the back of the last Marine. He rolled away. "Contact," the Marine shouted. The mine beeped. The detective shielded the astropath with his cape. The explosion rocked the room. Shrapnel flew. The detective was no longer just investigating. He was at war, and the war was just getting started. He pulled the astropath to her feet and they ran into the darkness, leaving the fire behind them. The Vengeful Spirit was vast, but he would make every inch of it a nightmare for the traitors. The darkness of the Vengeful Spirit was no longer just the absence of light. It was a physical substance. It felt like wet velvet against the skin. The detective sat in the corner of a ventilation control room. He was sharpening a piece of scrap metal. He had lost his combat knife in the fight with the Cyberhound. Now he used a shard of ceramite he had scavenged from a dead traitor. He ground the edge against the concrete floor. The sound was rhythmic. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was the only sound that made sense. Outside the thick blast door, the ship was screaming. The metal bulkheads groaned as the warp pressed against them. It sounded like a submarine diving too deep. The pressure was not water. It was souls. Millions of souls trying to get inside the ship to eat the crew. The astropath lay on a pile of rags. She was shivering. Her skin was grey. Blood trickled constantly from her nose. She was the radio. She was the only link to the reality outside this hell. The detective watched her. He checked her pulse. It was erratic. She was burning out. The human brain was not designed to channel the energy of the Imperium for this long without the Astronomicon to guide it. But she was holding on. She was strong. Stronger than the soldiers who had turned traitor. She had a duty. "I see him," she whispered. Her voice was like cracking parchment. The detective stopped sharpening. He moved to her side. He offered her a sip of recycled water. "Focus," he said. "What is Loken doing?" "He is in the Coral City," she gasped. "The city is dead. The fire took it, but the palace remains. He is fighting. There are others. Tarvits, Vipers. They are holding the line against the World Eaters." The detective processed this. The World Eaters were Angron's legion. They were berserkers. They fought without strategy. They just killed. If Loken was fighting them in a ruined city, it was a meat grinder. The loyalists on the ground would run out of ammunition before the traitors ran out of bodies. "Are they receiving air support?" the detective asked. "No," the astropath said. Her eyes moved rapidly behind her scarred lids. "The sky is full of storm birds, but they are bombing, not helping. The Warmaster is sending more drop pods, thousands of them. He wants to drown them in blood." The detective stood up. He walked to the wall map. It was a schematic of the Vengeful Spirit's lower decks. He traced the lines with his gauntlet. "Drop pods," he said. "That is the variable." He analyzed the logistics. A drop pod assault required three things. It required the pods themselves. It required the soldiers to fill them. And it required the launch tubes to be clear and powered. The Vengeful Spirit was a Gloriana-class battleship. It had enough drop pods to invade a solar system. If Horus kept launching waves of reinforcements, the survivors on Isstvan III would die within 48 hours. The detective could not stop the World Eaters who were already on the ground, but he could stop the reinforcements. "We are moving," he said. The astropath tried to sit up. She fell back. "I cannot walk," she said. "My legs, I cannot feel them." The detective looked at her legs. The veins were black. The corruption of the warp was affecting her body. She was dying. He did not hesitate. He picked her up. He carried her on his back. She weighed almost nothing. She was just bones and robes. "Hold on," he said. "We have a job to do." He left the safety of the control room. He stepped back into the nightmare. The corridor had changed again. The floor was now spongy. It felt like walking on flesh. The walls were weeping a clear, sticky fluid. The lights were not electric anymore. They were floating orbs of blue fire that gave off no heat. The detective ignored it all. He relied on his internal compass. He relied on the step count he had memorized. He was heading for Sector 7G, the starboard launch bays. He moved through the shadows. He saw patrols. They were different now. The soldiers were not marching. They were shambling. Some of them had fused with their weapons. He saw a man whose arm was a laser gun. He saw a woman whose face was melted into her helmet. The warp was changing them, reflecting their inner ugliness on the outside. The detective avoided them. He did not engage. Combat was a waste of time and calories. He needed to save his energy for the machine. They reached a cargo elevator. The doors were stuck. The detective put the astropath down. He jammed his pry bar into the gap. He forced the doors open. The shaft was empty. The elevator car was gone. It was a black pit going down forever. "We climb," he said. He used his grapple line. He tied the astropath to his chest. He rappelled down the shaft. The cables were slick with oil and slime. He descended 5 decks. He swung to the door of the launch level. He kicked it open. The noise hit him instantly. It was the sound of industry, hammers, drills, hydraulics. He crept onto the catwalk. He looked down. The launch bay was a cavern. It was 5 miles long. Rows and rows of drop pods hung in the racks. They looked like metal teardrops. Thousands of space marines were preparing for war. They were painting their armor. They were sharpening their blades. The noise was deafening. But the detective was not looking at the soldiers. He was looking at the mechanism. The drop pods were fed into the launch tubes by a massive gravity rail system. The rails were powered by a dedicated plasma generator. If he could disable the rails, the pods would be stuck in the racks. The reinforcements would be stranded. He scanned the room. The generator was at the far end of the bay. It was guarded, not by men, by a dreadnought. The detective zoomed in with his cowl lenses. The dreadnought was a Contemptor class, a walking tank. It was painted sea green and black. It stood motionless in front of the generator control room. Its weapons were assault cannons and a power claw. It was a gatekeeper that never slept. "Put me down," the astropath whispered. She was conscious again. The detective set her down behind a stack of crates. "I cannot fight that machine," the detective said. "My explosives are too weak. I need a distraction, a big one." "I can help," the astropath said. "The machine, it has a pilot inside, a half-dead warrior sleeping in a sarcophagus. I can wake him. I can show him a nightmare. Can you do that without revealing our position?" "No," she said. "When I touch his mind, the sorcerers will feel it. They will come for us." The detective looked at the generator. He looked at the thousands of enemy soldiers below. He looked at the dying woman. "Do it," he said. "Give me 30 seconds." The astropath closed her eyes. She reached out with her mind. She screamed silently. Below them, the dreadnought twitched. Its massive metal head turned. The red lights in its eyes flared. Then it roared. It was a mechanical roar amplified by speakers. The dreadnought began to fire its cannons. It did not fire at the enemy. It fired at the empty air. It was fighting a ghost in its mind. "Traitors," the dreadnought boomed. "Get back. I will not yield." The soldiers on the deck scattered. The massive cannons tore through the drop pods. Explosions blossomed. The deck turned into chaos. The Space Marines started shooting back at their own war machine. "Hold fire," a captain shouted. "It's ancient Rilliner. His logic engine has failed. He's killing us." The detective moved. He ran along the catwalk. He was a blur. He jumped over the railing. He landed on top of a hanging drop pod. He jumped to the next one. He was moving toward the generator while the army fought the dreadnought. He reached the control room. The door was locked. He used his last-shaped charge. He blew the hinges. He kicked the door in. Inside, 3 tech priests were frantically trying to shut down the dreadnought. They did not see the detective until he was already moving. He broke the first priest's neck with a chop of his gauntlet. He swept the legs of the second one and smashed his head into the console. The third priest pulled a pistol. The detective threw his ceramite shard. It hit the priest in the hand. The gun fell. The detective finished him with a knee to the chest. He was alone in the control room. He looked at the console. It was complex. Mechanicus code. He did not try to hack it. He did not have time. He looked for the physical safety interlocks. He found the coolant release valves. He turned them all to shut. Then he found the magnetic containment field dials. He turned them to 0. He was inducing a thermal runaway. The generator would not explode immediately. It would melt. It would fuse the gravity rails into a solid block of slag. The launch tubes would be sealed by molten metal. Warning, the computer voice droned. Core temperature rising. Critical failure imminent. The detective smashed the console screen with his fist so they could not reverse it easily. He ran out of the room. Below, the dreadnought had been silenced. A squad of Terminators had torn its arms off with chain fists. The launch bay was burning. Smoke filled the air. The detective looked back at the catwalk where he had left the astropath. He saw them. A squad of raptors. They were the jump-pack troops of the Night Lords, attached to Horus's fleet. They were perched on the railing like vultures. They had found her. One of the raptors held the astropath by her neck. Her feet dangled off the ground. The detective froze. He had a clear shot with his grapple gun, but the distance was too great. The raptor looked directly at the detective. His helmet was a skull mask. "We found your pet," the raptor screeched over the vox. The detective did not speak. He calculated the trajectory. "Come and get her, little bat," the raptor laughed. The raptor dropped her. She fell. It was a long fall to the deck below. The detective did not scream. He did not despair. He dived. He jumped from the control room balcony. He fell through the smoke. He angled his body to increase his speed. He was a missile aimed at the ground. He fired his grapple gun at a passing gantry. The line caught. He swung in a wide arc. He intercepted her fall. He caught her in midair. The impact nearly ripped his arm out of the socket. His injured shoulder screamed in agony. The wire of the grapple gun strained. It was not meant to hold two people. They swung toward a service platform. They crashed onto the metal grating. The detective took the brunt of the impact. He rolled, shielding her body with his own. They slid to a halt. The detective gasped for air. His ribs were definitely broken now. He checked the astropath. She was unconscious, but she was breathing. "Target located," the raptor voice said from above. "The hunt is on." The detective stood up. He dragged the astropath into a maintenance tunnel. He welded the hatch shut behind him. He leaned against the wall. He was exhausted. He had stopped the drop pods. The generator was melting down. He could hear the structure of the ship groaning as the heat warped the metal. The reinforcement of Isstvan III had been halted. It was a victory. But the cost was coming. The tunnel shook. Something was banging on the hatch. The raptors were coming, and they were fast. They would cut through the door in seconds. The detective looked down the tunnel. It led to the waste disposal systems. It was a one-way trip to the garbage compactor. "Wake up." He shook the astropath. She opened her eyes. "Did we win?" "We bought them time," he said. "Now we have to survive." They ran. The sound of cutting torches hissed behind them. The door gave way. "Scream for me," the Night Lords howled as they entered the tunnel. The detective did not run blindly. He was leading them. He knew this part of the ship. He had studied the blueprints. This tunnel had a flaw. It passed directly under the heavy bolter ammunition magazine. He reached a junction. He saw a pipe labeled Prometheum Return. He stopped. "Run," he told the astropath. "Keep going until you see the green light. Hide there." "What about you?" "I am the distraction," he said. She looked at him with her blind eyes. "You are not a man," she said. "You are a construct of will." She ran. The detective turned to face the enemy. He stood in the middle of the narrow tunnel. He drew a handful of ball bearings from his belt. He threw them on the floor. The first raptor flew around the corner. His jump pack roared. He landed on the bearings. His metal feet slipped. He crashed into the wall. The detective was on him instantly. He did not use his fists. He used the raptor's own momentum. He grabbed the raptor's chainsword arm and twisted it. The chainsword carved into the raptor's own chest plate. Sparks flew. The traitor screamed. The second raptor landed behind the first. He fired his bolt pistol. The explosive shells hit the walls. Concrete shrapnel flew. The detective used the first raptor as a shield. The body absorbed the shots. The detective kicked the dead body into the second raptor. He retreated. He ran back to the fuel pipe. He planted a small charge on it. The Night Lords were cautious now. They advanced slowly. They were predators. They enjoyed the fear. "There is nowhere to go," their leader hissed. He had lightning claws on both hands. The detective stood by the pipe. "I'm not going anywhere," the detective said. He detonated the charge. The pipe ruptured. Liquid fuel sprayed out. It filled the tunnel with a mist of promethium. The Night Lords laughed. "You missed. You didn't even light it." "I don't need to light it," the detective said. "You do." The leader stepped forward. The static field on his lightning claws crackled. A single spark. The spark met the fuel mist. The explosion was a thermobaric event. The fire consumed the oxygen in the tunnel instantly. The blast wave hit the Night Lords like a hammer. The detective had already rolled into a side alcove he had spotted earlier. He pulled a blast shield over himself. The fire roared past him. It incinerated the raptors. Their armor cooked them from the inside. The shockwave traveled up the tunnel. It hit the ammo magazine above. The ceiling collapsed. Tons of rockcrete and steel fell, sealing the tunnel. The detective was buried in the dark. Silence returned. He pushed the debris off his legs. He was trapped, but he was alive. The enemy was dead. He turned on his cowl light. The air was thin. The fire had eaten most of it. He had maybe 20 minutes of air left in the pocket. He crawled through the rubble. He found a small ventilation shaft. It was too small for a space marine. But the detective was not a space marine. He dislocated his own shoulder, the one that wasn't broken, to fit through the opening. He dragged himself through the dust. He popped the shoulder back in with a grunt of agony. He was a mess of broken bones and bruises, but his mind was clear. He emerged in a lower drainage pipe. He found the astropath waiting in the green light of a slime pool. She looked at him. He was covered in soot and blood. His cape was burned away. "You are alive," she said, sounding surprised. "The mission is not over," he rasped. They moved deeper. They were in the bowels of the ship now, the lowest point. This was where the Geller field generator was housed, the heart of the ship's protection against the warp. The detective had a new thought, a dangerous thought. He had stopped the physical reinforcements, but the traitors had a bigger weapon, the warp itself. The sorcerers were summoning demons to loose upon the surface of Isstvan. If he could damage the Geller field, the ship would be flooded with demons. It would force the fleet to drop out of the warp to survive. It would disrupt their ritual. It was suicide. If the field failed completely, everyone on board would die, including him, including the loyalists he was trying to save. He had to damage it just enough. He had to make it flicker. They approached the Geller field sanctum. It was a cathedral of gold and brass. The air hummed with power. The generator was a massive device, pulsating with a strange rhythm. It was guarded by something worse than space marines. It was guarded by the Neverborn. Shadows detached themselves from the walls. They were tall, thin creatures with too many limbs. They had no faces, just smooth skin. They held swords made of black glass, daemonets of Slaanesh. The detective stopped. He had no ammunition. He had no explosives. He had one arm that worked. "They are beautiful," the astropath whispered, her mind being clouded by the aura of the demons. "Don't look at them," the detective ordered. The demonettes danced toward them. They moved with a fluid, hypnotic grace. They were fast, faster than the eye could follow. The detective analyzed the environment. The floor was polished marble. There was no cover. The generator hummed in the center, surrounded by a force fence. He saw the coolant pipes running along the ceiling. They were frozen over with ice, liquid nitrogen. He picked up a heavy wrench from a dead servitor. "Stay behind me," he said. The first demonette lunged. She did not strike. She caressed the air, and the air cut his armor like a razor. The detective ducked. He swung the wrench. It passed through her body like smoke. Physical weapons were useless. They were not fully material. "Belief," the astropath shouted. "You must believe the weapon will hurt them. They are creatures of emotion." The detective gritted his teeth. He did not believe in magic. He believed in physics. Mass times acceleration equals force. "I believe in physics," he growled. He threw the wrench, not at the demon, at the ceiling. It hit the valve of the liquid nitrogen pipe. The valve broke. The supercooled liquid sprayed down. It hit the demonettes. Physics won. The extreme cold froze the moisture in the air. It froze the ectoplasm of the demons. They solidified. They turned into statues of blue ice. They screamed as they froze, a sound that shattered glass. The detective charged. He shattered the frozen demons with a kick. They broke into 1,000 pieces. He reached the generator console. He looked at the frequency dials. The field was oscillating at a precise harmonic to keep the warp out. He grabbed the dial. "Don't," a voice said. The detective turned. Standing in the doorway was a giant. He wore armor of pure white, trimmed with gold. He had a perfect face, handsome and noble. A halo of light surrounded him. It was Horus, the Warmaster. The detective stared. It couldn't be. Horus was on the bridge, miles away. "You have caused me a lot of trouble, little man," Horus said. His voice was warm. "I admire your tenacity. You fight like a wolf." "I am not a wolf," the detective said. "I am a man." "You are a wasted asset," Horus said. He walked forward. The ice on the floor melted under his feet. "Join me. I can fix your body. I can give you the power to enforce your justice on the entire galaxy. Think of the order you could bring." The detective looked at the golden giant. His sensors were going haywire. They detected no heat, no heartbeat. "You are not Horus," the detective said. "You are a projection." "I am the will of the Warmaster," the figure smiled. "And I am offering you a choice. Die here, forgotten in the dark, or stand at my right hand." The detective looked at the dial in his hand. "I made my choice a long time ago," he said. He turned the dial. He shifted the frequency. The Geller field flickered. The reality of the room tore open. The golden image of Horus dissolved into maggots. The walls turned to teeth. Gravity reversed. The detective and the astropath fell toward the ceiling. The ship screamed. The Vengeful Spirit lurched violently. It was being forced out of the warp. The emergency translation had begun. The detective grabbed a cable as he fell. He held onto the astropath with his legs. The world turned white. They were slamming back into real space. The transition was brutal. The detective blacked out for a second. When he woke up, he was lying on the ceiling, which was now the floor. The ship was listing 45 degrees. The alarms were deafening. Emergency translation complete. Hull integrity compromised. Invasion deck sealed. He had done it. He had forced the fleet to stop. He had disrupted the timeline. He looked at the astropath. She was not moving. He crawled to her. "We did it," he said. She did not answer. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. Her skin was cold. She was dead. The strain of the translation, combined with the warp exposure, had killed her. The detective sat there for a moment. He closed her eyes. He crossed her hands over her chest. He was alone again. But he had hurt them. He had hurt them bad. He stood up. He checked his belt. Empty. He checked his body. Broken. He looked at the map. He was near the shuttle bays. The chain reaction had started. The fleet was in chaos. Now he had to make his next move. He was not done. He would never be done. He limped into the shadows, leaving the dead girl in the cathedral of machines. This ended not with a bang, but with the cold resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose but his war. The detective woke up to the sound of screaming metal. The Vengeful Spirit was bleeding. Not just oil and coolant, but actual blood was dripping from the walls where the Geller field had failed. He was lying on a grate in the auxiliary engineering deck. His body felt heavy. He tried to move his right arm and a sharp pain shot through his chest. His ribs were grinding together. He checked his suit diagnostics. The screen on his wrist was cracked. It flickered with red warning runes. Armor integrity was at 20%. Life support was failing. He had 1 canister of oxygen left. He sat up. The room was spinning. He forced himself to breathe slowly. In, out, in, out. Panic consumed oxygen. He could not afford panic. He looked around. The astropath was gone. He had left her body in the sanctum. She was at peace. He was not. He was still in the war. He checked his utility belt. It was almost empty. He had his grapple gun, but the cable was frayed. He had 1 smoke pellet. He had a combat knife he had taken from a dead traitor. That was it. He was hunting a legion of monsters with a knife and a rope. He stood up. His knees shook. He forced them to lock. He was not done. The fleet had dropped out of the warp, but they were still in orbit over Isstvan III. The massacre on the ground was still happening. He needed to get off this ship. He needed to get to the surface. He could not stop the fleet from space, but on the ground he could find the survivors. He could lead them, or he could die with them. He moved into the hallway. The gravity was back to normal, but the ship felt wrong. The shadows were too long. The air smelled like ozone and rotten flowers. This was the scent of the Emperor's children, the Third Legion. They were the ones who sought perfection. Now they sought sensation. The detective knew they were guarding the VIP hangars. That was where the shuttles were. He limped through the corridors. He avoided the main junctions. He used the service crawl spaces. He dragged his broken body through grease and filth. He was a creature of the vents now. He saw patrols passing below him. They were moving with urgency. The ship was being repaired. The officers were shouting orders. They were angry. The disruption of the warp jump had cost them time. It had cost them momentum. The detective reached a grate overlooking Hangar Bay 4. This was a private bay. It was not for the mass assault. It was for high-priority transport. He looked down. The floor was polished white marble. It was spotless. In the center of the bay stood a Stormbird gunship. It was painted purple and gold. It was a work of art. But the cargo being loaded was the real story. A group of apothecaries was moving metal crates into the Stormbird. These were not ammo crates. They were stasis caskets. They were refrigerated units used to store biological material. The detective zoomed in with his cowl lenses. The magnification was grainy, but he could read the labels. Legion Astartes Gene Seed Pure Stock. The detective froze. He knew what Gene Seed was. It was the genetic material used to create Space Marines. It was the future of the legions. Without it, they could not make new soldiers. If they lost it, they would slowly die out. These crates contained the uncorrupted genetic code of the Traitor legions. It was their bank account, and they were moving it. A figure walked up the ramp of the Stormbird. He was not like the other Space Marines. He wore a long white coat over his power armor. On his back was a mechanical device with many arms. The arms had saws, drills, and syringes. They moved like the legs of a spider. It was Fabius Bile, the chief apothecary of the Emperor's children. The detective knew this name from his research. Bile was a genius and a madman. He did not care about the war. He cared about experiments. He wanted to build a new man. Bile was shouting at the loaders. "Careful, you clumsy oxen. That genetic stock is worth more than your lives. It is the foundation of the new order. If you drop it, I will graft your lungs to the outside of your chest." The detective analyzed the situation. There were 20 crates. That was enough gene seed to create thousands of new Space Marines. If Horus kept this, his army would be immortal. He could replace every loss he took on Isstvan. The detective looked at the shuttle. He looked at the fuel lines running along the wall. He had a choice. He could try to sneak onto a different shuttle and escape. He could save his own life. He could go to the ground and fight with a gun. Or he could stop this shipment. If he stopped the shipment, he would likely die. The security was too tight. Fabius Bile was a lethal combatant. But if he destroyed that gene seed, he would cripple the Traitor legions for centuries. They would have to use unstable cloning. They would degrade. They would become monsters that broke down. It was a small choice. One shuttle, one shipment. But the math was clear. The future mattered more than the present. The detective made his choice. He was not leaving. He was attacking. He scanned the room for a weapon. He saw a cargo loader mech parked in the corner. It was a yellow exoskeleton used for lifting heavy boxes. It had a heavy hydraulic claw. It was not a tank, but it was heavy metal. The detective crawled along the ceiling pipes. He moved until he was directly over the loader. He dropped. He landed in the open roll cage of the loader. He did not turn on the engine. That would make noise. He released the parking brake. The loader was on a slight incline. It started to roll. It rolled faster. It was heading toward the fuel pumps. The detective jumped out of the loader before it hit. He rolled across the floor, hiding behind a stack of tires. The loader smashed into the fuel pump. The metal tore. High-octane aviation fuel sprayed out. It covered the floor of the hangar. It flowed around the crates of gene seed. The noise alerted the guards. "Breach!" a soldier shouted. Fabius Bile turned. He saw the fuel. He sniffed the air. "Stop the pumps!" Bile screamed. "Secure the samples." The apothecaries dropped the crates. They ran to the shut-off valves. The detective stood up. He held his last flare. He did not throw it to the soldiers. He threw it to the floor. The flare hissed. It burned red. "No!" Bile roared. The fuel ignited. It was not an explosion. It was a wave. A wall of fire raced across the hangar. It engulfed the crates. The stasis caskets were insulated, but not against jet fuel burning at 2,000 degrees. The seals melted. The cooling units exploded. The biological material inside cooked. The future of the Third Legion turned into ash in seconds. The detective watched the fire. He felt the heat on his face. It felt like justice. Then the spider came for him. Fabius Bile jumped through the fire. His armor was scorched, but he did not care. He was fast. His mechanical arms snapped and hissed. "Do you know what you have done?" Bile whispered. His voice was calm, which was more terrifying than screaming. You have burned the perfect evolution of mankind. You have set us back 1,000 years. The detective drew his combat knife. It looked like a toothpick compared to Bile's gear. I just saved the galaxy from more of you, the detective said. Bile lunged, a mechanical arm with a syringe aimed for the detective's neck. The detective dodged. He stepped inside the guard. He stabbed his knife into the joint of the mechanical arm. The blade broke. It did nothing. Bile backhanded him. The blow sent the detective flying. He hit the wall. His armor cracked again. He tasted blood. Bile walked toward him. He pulled a strange needle pistol from his holster. I will not kill you, Bile said. You are fascinating. You have no augmentations. Your heart is human. Yet you destroyed my work. I must understand you. I will take you apart, piece by piece, while you are awake. The detective tried to stand. His legs were numb. The fire was spreading. The alarms were blaring. He looked at the ceiling. The fire suppression system. It was a chemical foam system. He looked at Bile. The spider was confident. He was playing with his food. The detective reached into his belt. He found a small remote detonator. It was for a charge he had placed hours ago. A charge he had forgotten. It was not here. It was on the structural support of the hangar door. He pressed the button. The explosion was small. It blew the bolts on the massive blast door. The door was heavy. Without the bolts, gravity took over. The door slammed down. It cut off the exit, but it also shook the ceiling. A loose support beam, weakened by the fire, groaned. It fell. It fell directly between the detective and Bile. The beam was tons of steel. It crashed through the floor. It created a barrier of twisted metal and fire. Bile screamed in frustration. You cannot hide from science. The detective did not hide. He ran. He ran away from Bile, toward the burning Stormbird. The shuttle was damaged. The paint was bubbling. But the engines were still running. The detective climbed the ramp. The cockpit was empty. The pilot had fled the fire. The detective jumped into the pilot seat. He did not know how to fly a Legion Stormbird, but he knew logic. He knew thrust and lift. He looked at the controls. They were standard Imperial layout. He grabbed the yoke. He punched the throttle to maximum. Warning, the computer said. Hangar doors closed. Launch impossible. Watch me, the detective said. He fired the main thrusters. The blue flame incinerated the back wall of the hangar. The ship lurched forward. It smashed through the burning crates. It hit the closed hangar door. The door bowed. The metal screamed. The Stormbird had shields. The hangar door did not. The ship punched through the door like a bullet through a tin can. The detective was thrown against the restraints. The glass of the cockpit cracked. The ship shot out into the void of space. Air rushed out of the hangar behind him. The fire was sucked out into the vacuum. Fabius Bile was left behind, holding a handful of ash, screaming silently in the dark. The detective was free, but he was falling. The Stormbird was leaking atmosphere. One engine was dead. He was in a spin. Below him was the planet Isstvan III. It was a ruin. The continents were burning. The oceans were boiling. He fought the controls. The stick shook in his hands. He needed to stabilize the descent. Computer, he yelled. Auto-stabilize. System damaged, the computer replied. Manual control required. The detective gritted his teeth. He used his remaining strength. He pulled the nose up. He fired the maneuvering thrusters. The spin slowed. The ship entered the atmosphere. The heat shield began to glow. Red, orange, white. The detective felt the G-force crushing him. His vision went black at the edges. He was riding a meteor. He looked out the window. He saw the city below. The Coral City, It was a skeleton of buildings. He aimed for the palace district. That was where the resistance would be. That was where Loken was. The ground rushed up to meet him. He fired the retro rockets. They coughed and died. Brace, he said to himself. The crash was violent. The Stormbird hit a ruined cathedral. It ploughed through stone pillars. It tore a trench in the ground for 300 yards. It came to a stop upside down. Silence returned. The detective hung in his harness. Blood dripped from his nose onto the ceiling. He fumbled with the buckle. It clicked. He fell to the floor. He crawled out of the broken cockpit. He fell onto the ash-covered ground of Isstvan III. The air was toxic. It was full of virus gas residue and smoke. He activated his rebreather. It had 10 minutes of filters left. He stood up. He was alive. He looked around. The city was grey. Everything was grey. The bodies of the dead were everywhere. They were turned to sludge by the virus. But he heard something. Gunfire. Bolter fire. It was distant but distinct. The rhythmic thud, thud, thud of Astartes' weapons. The resistance was still fighting. The detective started to walk. He left the burning wreck of the shuttle. He had no plan now. He had no gadgets. It was just a man in a broken suit. He walked for an hour through the ruins. He saw the statues of the Emperor that had been toppled. He saw the propaganda posters burning. Then he saw them. A squad of World Eaters. They were white and blue, but covered in red gore. They were butchering a group of survivors in a bunker. The detective watched from behind a wall. He saw the World Eaters laughing. They had chain axes. They were lost to the nails in their brains. The detective looked at his hand. He held the combat knife. He could walk away. He could find Loken. But the detective did not walk away from murder. He tapped the side of his cowl. He activated the speakers. He turned the volume to maximum. He did not have a weapon that could kill 5 World Eaters, so he used fear. He projected a sound. It was not a scream. It was a low, subsonic pulse. It sounded like a heartbeat. Thump, 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 thump. The World Eaters stopped. They looked around. "Who is there?" one shouted. "Come out and die." The detective threw a rock. It hit a sheet of metal on the left. The World Eaters turned. The detective moved to the right. He jumped onto the back of the rearguard Marine. He drove the knife into the soft seal of the neck armor. He twisted. The Marine gargled and fell. The detective grabbed the Marine's bolt pistol. Now he had a gun. He fired. 2 shots, 2 headshots. The closest World Eater went down. The other 3 roared and charged. The detective did not stand his ground. He ran into the ruins. He led them into the maze. "Come to me," he whispered. He used the darkness. He used the dust. He was the predator now. He separated them. He killed them one by one. The last one was the sergeant. He was huge. He had a chain axe in each hand. "I see you, little bat," the sergeant yelled. "You bleed like a man." The detective stepped out of the shadows. He was 10 feet away. He dropped the empty pistol. "I'm a man," the detective said. "That is why you should be afraid." The sergeant charged. The detective waited. He waited until the axe was inches from his face. He dropped to his knees. He slid between the sergeant's legs. He pulled the pin on the sergeant's own grenade belt. He kicked the sergeant in the back of the knee. The sergeant stumbled. He turned around. "What?" The detective rolled behind a concrete slab. The grenades detonated. The sergeant vanished in a cloud of fire and meat. The detective stood up. He was panting. His lungs burned. The filter was failing. He walked to the bunker. The survivors were huddled inside. They were human soldiers, Imperial army. They looked at him with wide eyes. They saw a monster in black armor, covered in blood and ash. "Are you an angel?" a young soldier asked. "No," the detective said. "I am a detective." He looked at the officer. "Where is Captain Loken?" The officer pointed north. "The precentor's palace. They are making a last stand. But the traitors, they are sending a titan." The detective looked north. He saw it. Towering above the ruins, miles away, was a god machine. A titan. It was the Disirai, the Legion of Death. Its horn blasted a sound that shook the ground. It was marching towards the palace. "Get your men," the detective said. "Move to the tunnels. Survive." "Where are you going?" the soldier asked. "I'm going to solve the case," the detective said. He walked north. He walked toward the giant robot. He walked toward the end of the world. He was tired. Every step was agony. But he had a theory. Even a god machine had a weakness. Even a titan had a blind spot. He had destroyed the future of the traitor legions in orbit. Now he would try to save the past on the ground. He checked his belt. He had scavenged 2 crack grenades from the World Eaters, 2 grenades against a titan. The odds were impossible. The detective smiled under his mask. It was a grim, bloody smile. "Fair enough," he said. He broke into a run. He ran through the shattered streets. He ran past the burning tanks. He ran past the bodies of his brothers. He reached the edge of the palace plaza. The battle here was total war. Thousands of traitor marines were assaulting the walls. The loyalists were holding, but barely. Loken was there. The detective saw him on the wall. He was fighting Abaddon, the first captain against the 10th, brother against brother. The detective could not help them in a duel. He had to stop the Titan. The dies. Arai raised its plasma annihilator. It aimed at the palace wall. If it fired, the resistance would end. The detective looked at the Titan's feet. They were the size of buildings. He looked at the street. Under the street was the sewer system. He looked at the map in his mind. The main gas line for the city ran under this plaza. The Titan was standing right on top of it. The gas had been shut off, but the residual pressure was massive. If he could rupture the line, the detective did not hesitate. He dove into a manhole. He dropped into the dark water. He swam. He swam against the current of filth. He swam until he was under the plaza. He heard the stomping of the Titan above. The ceiling shook. Dust fell. He found the main valve. It was rusted. He placed the 2 cracked grenades on the valve. He set the timer. 10 seconds. He did not swim away. He did not have time. He climbed a ladder to a side tunnel. He curled into a ball. "For the truth," he whispered. The grenades went off. The explosion was muted underground, but the effect was not. The valve shattered. The high-pressure gas rushed out. It hit the spark of the explosion. The street above erupted. The ground under the dies. Irai's right foot liquefied. The pavement turned into a crater of fire. The Titan stumbled. The god machine lost its balance. It tipped. It did not fall completely, but its aim was ruined. The plasma shot went wild. It missed the palace. It hit the traitor lines instead. It vaporized a company of sons of Horus. The Titan roared in mechanical fury. It tried to right itself, but the moment was bought. The loyalists cheered. The detective climbed out of the sewer. He was covered in sludge. He climbed to the roof of a nearby building. He looked at the palace. He saw Loken look up. Loken saw the explosion. He saw the Titan stumble. Then he looked across the plaza. Loken saw the small black figure on the roof. The detective raised his hand. A salute. Loken nodded. Then the detective turned away. The Titan was recovering. The traitors were regrouping. The end was still coming, but he had bought them another hour. And in that hour, legends would be written. The detective faded into the smoke. He was not a soldier. He was a symbol, and symbols did not die. They just waited for the next night. He moved deeper into the ruins, hunting for the next clue, the next weakness, the next life to save. The long night of the Horus Heresy had begun, and the detective was the only one holding a light. The dust from the Titan stumble hung in the air like a thick grey curtain. It covered the sun. The detective stood on the roof of the ruined Administratum building. He was bleeding from 3 different places in his armor. His left leg servo was whining with a high-pitched noise that would not stop. He hit it with his fist. The noise stopped. The servo died. He was now dragging 50 pounds of dead metal with every step. He did not care. The pain was just data. The data said he was critical. The logic said he had to keep moving. He looked down at the plaza. The loyalist Space Marines were cheering. They had seen the God Machine trip. It was a moment of hope. But the detective knew hope was dangerous. Hope made you sloppy. The Titan was not destroyed. It was just angry. The Dies Irae was already pushing itself up. Its massive hydraulics screamed like dying whales. The ground shook as it regained its footing. The detective knew the next shot would not miss. The window of opportunity was closed. He climbed down the fire escape. The metal was twisted and hot. He reached the ground level. A squad of Death Guard loyalists was waiting for him. They were covered in grime. Their unpainted armor was grey and scratched. They looked like statues of endurance. "The captain wants to see you," the leader said. He was a sergeant with a broken nose. "He says you are the variable." The detective nodded. He did not speak. He followed them. They led him into the precentor's palace. It was a magnificent building once. Now it was a fortress. The windows were bricked up. The statues were used as sandbags. The beautiful gardens were trenches. Inside the main hall, the air smelled of antiseptic and cordite. The wounded were everywhere. Space Marines sat against the walls, patching their own armor. They were silent. They were processing the betrayal. Their fathers had tried to kill them. That wound was deeper than any sword cut. In the center of the room was a tactical table. It was a slab of marble. A map of the city was drawn on it in marker. 3 giants stood around it. The detective recognized them from his files. Garviel Loken of the Lunar Wolves, Saul Tarvitz of the Emperor's Children, Tarek Torgaden of the Lunar Wolves. They looked up as the detective limped in. They were huge. Even without their helmets, they towered over him. They were genetically perfect. He was just a man who had trained too hard. "You are the one," Loken said. His face was open and honest. He had the eyes of a man who was watching his world burn. "You dropped the Titan." "I delayed it," the detective said. His voice was a rasp. He accepted a canteen of water from Torgaden. "Who are you?" Tarvitz asked. He was the most composed. He was a line officer. He cared about logistics. "I am an investigator," the detective said. "I have come from the Vengeful Spirit." The room went silent. The Space Marines looked at him with shock. To be on the flagship and survive was impossible. "You were up there?" Torgaden asked. "Is Horus? Is he really gone?" "He is not gone," the detective said. "He is changed. He has made a deal with things that live in the dark. He is not just a traitor. He is a vessel." The detective reached into his utility belt. He pulled out a data slate. It was cracked, but the drive was intact. He placed it on the table. "This is the fleet rotation schedule," the detective said. "This is their supply logic. I stole it from the Warmaster's cogitator. It shows where they will strike next. It shows the blind spots in their orbital grid." Saul Tarvitz picked up the slate. He plugged it into the map table. Red lights appeared on the map. This changes everything." Tarvitz whispered. We thought they were attacking randomly, but they are not. They are herding us. They want us in the central plaza. For the fire, Loken said. No, the detective said. The fire is done. They want you in the plaza for the slaughter. Angron is landing. He wants a arena. He wants to look you in the eye when he kills you. The name of the World Eater's Primarch made the room colder. Angron was a gladiator king. He was unstoppable. We cannot beat Angron, Torgaden said. He crossed his massive arms. So we die. We make them pay for every inch. No, the detective said. You don't die, you endure. If you fight them on their terms, you lose. Angron wants a brawl. Don't give it to him. What do you suggest? Loken asked. He was looking at the detective with respect now. He saw the tactical mind behind the mask. We turn the palace into a maze, the detective said. We use the catacombs. We strike from the dark and vanish. We make them afraid of the shadows. We drag this out. Every hour we hold out is an hour Horus cannot move his fleet. Every hour is a message to the galaxy that he is not invincible. They spend the next hour planning. The detective showed them how to rig the corridors with explosives. He showed them how to create kill boxes using crossfire. He taught them the tactics of urban guerrilla warfare. The Space Marines were used to open war. They were used to honor. The detective taught them how to fight dirty. It is not honorable, Tarvitz said, looking at a diagram of a booby trap made from a melter gun charge. Honor is a luxury, the detective said. Victory is a necessity. Survival is the only revenge. They began the preparations. The detective worked alongside the Astartes. He did not have their strength, but he had precision. He wired the charges. He set the sensors. Night fell over Isstvan III. The sky was lit by the fires of the burning city. The attack came at midnight. It did not start with guns. It started with howling. The World Eaters came first. They ran through the streets like a wave of white and blue armor. They screamed for blood. The Loyalists were ready. They waited in the dark. When the World Eaters entered the plaza, the detective triggered the first line of defense. Mines detonated, not explosive mines, flash mines. Blinding white light filled the square. The World Eaters' autosenses were overloaded. They stumbled. Fire, Loken ordered from the wall. The Loyalists opened up with bolters. The first wave of traitors was cut down, but there were too many of them. They climbed over the bodies of the dead. They reached the walls. Chainswords met chainswords. Sparks flew. The detective was in the courtyard. He was fighting a different war. He was hunting the officers. He saw a World Eater Centurion shouting orders. The detective dropped from a statue. He landed on the Centurion's shoulders. He drove a spike into the power pack on the Marine's back. The reactor vented. The Marine fell. The detective rolled away. He used his grapple gun to pull a heavy gargoyle off the roof. It crushed 2 more enemies. He was a ghost. He appeared, struck, and vanished. The World Eaters started to panic. They were used to enemies who stood and fought. They did not understand an enemy who refused to be seen. "Face me," a voice roared. The detective stopped. He looked across the courtyard. A giant stood there. He wore red armor with bronze trim. He had a plasma pistol in one hand and a massive chain axe in the other. He had no helmet. His face was scarred and noble. It was Khan, the equerry of Angron, the 8th captain. The detective knew Khan. He was the best fighter in the Legion, maybe the best in the galaxy, after the Primarchs. The detective was tired. His body was failing. He had no gadgets left, just his knife and his broken armor. Khan walked toward him. He did not run. He walked with respect. "I saw you," Khan said. "In the ruins. You fight well for a mortal. You have the butcher's nails in your soul, if not your head. I am not like you, the detective said. He adjusted his stance. He put his weight on his good leg. We are all the same, Khan said. We all want to know who is strongest. Come, show me. Khan charged. He swung the axe. It was a blur. The detective did not try to block. If he blocked, his arm would shatter. He dodged. He moved under the swing. He slashed at Khan's leg joint. The knife sparked against the ceramite. It did not cut. Khan spun. He backhanded the detective. The blow hit the detective in the chest. It felt like being hit by a truck. The detective flew across the courtyard. He hit a stone pillar. The pillar cracked. The detective fell to the ground. He could not breathe. His ribs were powder. Khan walked over. He stood over the detective. Is that it? Khan asked. He sounded disappointed. I thought you were the bat demon. The detective coughed. Blood sprayed on his mask. I am, he gasped. He reached into his belt. He pulled out the transponder he had taken from the Vengeful Spirit, the one that controlled the orbital targeting array for a specific sector. He pressed the button. I am the distraction, the detective whispered. High above in orbit, a lance battery on a Traitor ship received a signal. It thought it was a firing solution from a forward observer. It fired. A beam of pure energy came down from the sky. It did not hit the palace. It hit the courtyard. It hit the ground 50 yards behind Khan. The explosion was blinding. The shockwave threw Khan forward. It threw everyone forward. The ground turned to glass. The detective was shielded by the pillar. Khan was not. Khan was buried in rubble. The chain axe flew from his hand. The battle stopped. Everyone looked at the crater. The detective used the moment. He did not finish Khan. He could not. He crawled away. He dragged himself into the catacombs under the palace. He was deep underground now. The sounds of battle were muffled. He was alone. He checked his vitals. He was dying. Internal bleeding. Organ failure. He had maybe an hour left. He had to secure the data. He had to make sure the history of this betrayal was saved. If everyone died, the traitors would write the history. They would say Loken and Tarvitz were the traitors. They would lie. The truth had to survive. He found the archive room of the palace. It was a vault reinforced with adamantium. It was designed to survive an atomic war. He limped inside. The room was full of scrolls and data stacks. He went to the main cogitator. He plugged in his data slate. Archive sequence initiated, the computer said. Warning, external power failing. Reroute auxiliary power, the detective said. Prioritize storage. He sat down in the chair. He watched the progress bar. 10%. 20%. The lights in the room flickered. Hello, detective. The voice came from the shadows. It was not a human voice. It was a voice like silk and razors. The detective spun around. He held his knife. A figure stepped out of the dark. It was tall, thin, and wore midnight blue armor. Its face was pale as death. Its eyes were black pits. Long, greasy hair hung over its face. Konrad Curze, the Night Haunter, the Primarch of the Night Lords. The detective froze. This was the unavoidable offer. Curze did not have a weapon drawn. He looked at the detective with curiosity. I've been watching you, Curze said, since you boarded the flagship. You are interesting. You are not a soldier. You are a judge. I am a man, the detective said. No, Curze smiled. It was a horrible sight. You are a symbol, like me. You use fear. You use the dark. You understand that justice requires terror. Curze walked closer. He smelled of old blood and ozone. Look at them. Curze pointed to the ceiling, indicating the loyalists dying above. They fight for a lie. They fight for a father who abandoned them. They fight for honor. You and I know honor is a joke. Only order matters. Only punishment matters. The detective looked at the Primarch. He saw the madness in Curze's eyes, but he also saw the mirror. Curze was what the detective could become if he lost his code, if he killed without rules, if he enjoyed the fear too much. I am not like you, the detective said. You torture because you hate. I punish because I care. Semantics. Curze waved his hand. I can save you. The fleet is about to glass this planet. Nothing will survive. Not a microbe. Join me. Come with the 8th Legion. We will clean the galaxy together. Imagine what we could do. My power. Your mind. We would be the ultimate justice. It was a tempting offer. To survive. To continue the mission. To have the power of a Primarch to enforce the law. The detective could fix the Imperium. He could stop the crime. He could save millions. All he had to do was shake the hand of a monster. The detective looked at the computer screen. 50%. He looked at Curze. You think you are justice, the detective said. But you are just a murderer with a crown. You kill because it is easy. I fight because it is hard. Curze's face twisted. The smile vanished. You are a fool. You are choosing death. I am choosing the truth, the detective said. He pressed a hidden button on the console. The vault door began to close. It was a massive slab of steel. Curze hissed. He lunged. But the detective had prepared. He triggered the fire suppression system inside the vault. Harlan gas flooded the room. It sucked the oxygen out instantly. Curze stopped. He was a Primarch. He could survive without air for a long time. But he hesitated. He looked at the closing door. He looked at the detective sitting in the chair. You will be forgotten, Curze screamed. I know, the detective whispered. The door slammed shut. The locks engaged. Clang, clang, clang. The detective was sealed inside the vault. Curze was on the outside. The detective was alone in the dark. The red emergency lights bathed the room in blood color. He watched the screen. 80%. The ground shook. The final bombardment had begun. Outside, the Desire and the fleet were pouring fire onto the coral city. The palace was collapsing. The loyalists were dying. Loken, Tarvitz, Torgaden. They were meeting their ends. They were dying as heroes. The detective felt the vibrations through the floor. The heat was rising. The vault was becoming an oven. 90%. He felt sleepy. The oxygen was low. His wounds were cold. He thought about his parents. He thought about the alleyway. He thought about the promise he made. He had kept it. He had fought the crime. The biggest crime in history. 100%. Archive complete. The computer beeped. The data was safe. The drive was locked in a stasis box inside the vault. It would survive the fire. It would survive the years. Someday, someone would find it. Someday, the truth would come out. The detective leaned back in the chair. He put his knife on the desk. He closed his eyes. Case closed, he whispered. The ceiling of the palace collapsed. Tons of rock buried the vault. The city was flattened. The planet burned. The silence returned to Isstvan III. The wind on the dead world of Isstvan III did not sound like wind. It sounded like the weeping of ghosts that had been screaming for 7,000 years. The planet was a graveyard of black glass and grey ash. The atmosphere was thin and toxic. Nothing lived here. There were no bacteria to eat the dead. The ruins of the coral city stood like jagged teeth against the purple sky of the warp storms that still flickered in the distance. The silence was absolute. It was a monument to the greatest crime in human history. A heavy lander touched down in the center of what was once the precentor's palace. The engines kicked up clouds of radioactive dust. The ramp lowered, and a retinue of figures descended. They wore the heavy environment suits of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the crimson robes of the Holy Inquisition. They were looking for the past. They were led by Lord Inquisitor Valerius. He was an old man kept alive by Juvenat treatments and sheer will. He walked with a cane made of black iron. He had spent his life hunting the truths that the Imperium had forgotten. He had found a reference in an ancient and forbidden text to a shadow in the palace. A warrior who was not a legionary. A man who had fought the gods with nothing but his mind. Valerius wanted to know if the myth was real. The tech priests deployed their ground-penetrating radar. They scanned the fused rock of the palace foundation. For 3 days they found nothing but crushed ceramite and the bones of space marines. The radiation was so high that their servitors broke down every 4 hours. On the 4th day, the radar pinged. It detected a void beneath the main plaza. It was a small room, perfectly square and sealed with adamantium. The excavation lasers took 12 hours to cut through the slag. When they reached the door, it was unmarked. There was no Aquila. There was no legion number. There was only a scratch in the metal. It looked like a winged creature. A bat. Valerius ran his gloved hand over the symbol. It was crude and carved by hand, but it held a psychological power that made his psycho senses itch. The tech priest bypassed the lock. The tumblers were mechanical and not digital. It was ancient technology that was simple and unbreakable. The door hissed open. The air that rushed out was stale. It tasted of Hallan gas and old blood. Valerius entered first. He held a glow globe. The light pushed back the shadows of millennia. The room was a small archive. The walls were lined with data stacks that had long since decayed into dust. But in the center of the room sat a chair, and in the chair sat a skeleton. It was not the skeleton of a space marine. The bones were too thin. The ribcage was not fused. There was no black carapace interface. It was a mortal man. He wore armor that was not mass-produced. It was a composite of mesh and ceramic plates painted void black. A cape of rot-proof polymer hung from his shoulders. On the desk in front of him lay a combat knife and a data slate. Valerius approached the desk. He felt a sense of vertigo. He was standing in the presence of a ghost that history had erased. This man had sat here while the world burned. He had waited for the end with a knife and a computer. The tech priest. Magos stepped forward to examine the slate. He intoned a prayer of awakening. He connected a power bypass. The device was old and its machine spirit was dormant for an age. The screen flickered. Green text scrolled. It was not a military log. It was a case file, evidence, video feeds, audio recordings. Valerius watched as the screen showed the face of Horus Lupercal before the corruption. He saw the face of the detective. He saw the logic of the betrayal laid out in cold, hard facts. This was not a story of gods and monsters. It was a story of a crime scene. Valerius listened to the final audio log. The voice was raspy and calm. It spoke across the centuries. I am the detective. The case is closed. But the work is not done. Do not trust the shadows, but do not fear them. Use them. The recording ended. Valerius looked at the skeleton. He realized the magnitude of what he had found. The Imperium worshipped the Emperor as a god of light. But this man had understood something else. He understood that to protect the light, you had to be willing to live in the dark. You had to be the thing that the monsters were afraid of. The Inquisitor picked up the combat knife. It was simple steel, chipped and stained. It was a weapon of pure will. The Magos asked if they should catalogue this as a saint of the Astra Militarum. Valerius shook his head. He said that saints are for the people to pray to. This man was not a saint. He was a warning. Valerius placed the data slate in a stasis casket. He looked at the bat symbol one last time. He ordered the vault to be sealed. He said they would leave him there. This was his grave. They would take only the lesson. They left the vault. They buried it again under tons of rock. They left Isstvan III to the silence and the ghosts. But as Valerius returned to his ship, he touched the rosette of the Inquisition on his chest. He made a silent vow. The Imperium was rotting from within, just as it had in the time of Horus. It needed more than soldiers. It needed detectives. It needed men who would look at the heresy and not blink. It needed the Batman. And though the name would be forgotten, the method would survive. The shadows of the Inquisition would grow longer, and in those shadows the spirit of the detective would hunt forever.